Welcome to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast with Darren Mitchell. If you're a sales leader looking to take your leadership to a whole new level, then this is the podcast for you. We'll be exploring tips, techniques, and strategies to help you take your leadership to the exceptional level and allow you to enjoy more money, more meaning, and better sales results. Welcome back to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast and another wonderful guest on what is, at the time of the recording, Friday morning in Melbourne, but Thursday afternoon in California. Welcome to the podcast, Wendy Leggett. How are you?
Oh, I'm terrific. It's great to be here. Thank you. And good morning to you.
Good morning and good afternoon. It's and we were saying before we press record that Friday does arrive. So you're talking in the future and I'm talking in the past.
Thank you very much for that.
But isn't it great? You can actually talk to people on the other side of the world and it feels as if, because we're on Zoom at the moment, it feels like we're just in the same room.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Sensational. So, Wendy, this is going to be an interesting conversation because you are you've got over 25 years in sales and sales leadership, but you've also been a sales recruiter. But you specialize now and have done for the last number of years in retirement coaching, and you run a business called Conflux Retirement Coaching.
Yeah.
And this is going to be fascinating because the sales leaders that I speak to, they are so caught up in their day-to-day grind of hitting their number, building sales strategies, making sure their team are at the highest levels of performance they possibly can be. And very rarely do they ever think about, oh, what am I going to be doing in retirement? And even though some of them may be closer than others to their retirement, they seem to continue to just be on the grind or the wheel of performance in their business. So this is going to be a fascinating conversation. As we get into this, can you just give us a little bit of a background in terms of your sales career, your sales leadership career?
Sure.
And I'm really curious to understand what was it that motivated you or inspired you to pivot or transition into this type of endeavor, being retirement coaching. It's a fascinating story.
I appreciate the question. So in the way of background around sales, when I was in high school, I was in sales in fashion. And then I moved up the ladder then in high school even. It's funny to think that when you're 17 or 18 that you're a department manager and things. But I think that, I think on the playground, I always loved being the leader, and it just kind of translated to those early career steps. And so from high school then into college, again in fashion, was a buyer and a leader of the teams there, but then moved into outside sales. And so I was in telecom for quite a few years, then stepped out for a bit to have my children, and then went back in, as you mentioned, sales recruiter. And then from there kind of went into a number of different opportunities because I wanted to see that advancement. So to answer your question, then how did this all come about? The last position that I was in, and I loved it, just like a lot of your listeners, high powered, we were really accomplishing a lot of fantastic things, creative things, moving the needle for these franchises that I was a sales director for. Loved the people that I was working for. And in hindsight, that was probably the worst thing because it set them up so that the company was, very viable to sell. And that's what they did.
Right.
So the new leadership, the new ownership, I should say, that came in had a very, very different approach. And I think, again, this will resonate with your listeners when, you're facing your people or you're facing your clients and you're having to share something that philosophically doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
I tried all kinds of different ways to couch it or soften it or go back and fight it. But it got to that point where it was like, this is soul sucking. I mean, I just can't face my people anymore. I can't carry this message to those clients anymore because the values were so out of alignment.
Yeah.
So that was like the worst of times and probably the best of times because it really forced me to then dig deep and think, okay, do I want to now move into another sales opportunity? Or is this now at this point in my life where I want something more for me?
Mm-hmm.
And more for me was, I loved the connection with the clients. I loved elevating my team's capabilities. I loved meeting and exceeding those sales and service numbers. But I wanted to bring more of myself forward. And so I started researching things. And, it's sort of funny how books will just come into your life. And I don't really even remember the book. I just remember reading something and reading about a coach. And it's like, wow, what's that all about? Because I knew about the consulting world, and I knew, I guess, about niche coaches maybe that we'd had, but not
Yeah.
really this life coach concept. So I ended up really looking into it. I went back to school. I got my professional certified coach credential through the International Coaching Federation. And then from there, became a business coach, but very quickly saw, this is more transactional than transformational for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I really wanted to be in that other space at that point. So then I kept digging deeper because a lot of my clients were, like you're mentioning, kind of on that cusp of retiring or thinking about it. And I saw this struggle out there as well with family and friends. And so then I discovered retirement coaching. So went back and got several credentials on that, as well as something called positive intelligence.
Wow.
So that's kind of my story. And here I am. I started Conflux Retirement Coaching about 5.5 years ago.
That's fascinating. As you were talking, Wendy, I'm thinking, you know what, there's some similarities between you and I in terms of both in corporate, both running sales teams, maybe the cultures at certain points of time we're not aligned with, our own values and our own beliefs and so forth. And sometimes it felt as if you were delivering a message that wasn't really truly heartfelt for us and almost like compromising our value set. But then discovering this thing called, coaching, mentoring, development, I was through the same process that I was in a big corporate and I had responsibilities. Yeah, we still delivered the numbers and we still did great work, but there was something missing, and that's how I discovered this pathway of coaching to eventually now sit here doing podcasts and coaching and mentoring and stuff like that, specializing in sales and sales leadership. So it does
Yeah.
happen. Did you at the time though think because to be honest, I've never heard of retirement coaching
You're
up
not
until this
alone.
point.
People say, wow, Wendy, that you came up with this idea. And it's like, well, I'd love to take credit for it, but there's tons of books out there. There's associations, there's credentials. So yeah, I think the reason why, Darren, is that the message, that heavy message out there is about finances and having that financial portfolio in
Yeah,
place.
yeah,
And we forget that we bring our whole selves into retirement, and there's that psychological portfolio, that social
yeah,
portfolio, all of those things that are just so vitally important, which I can get into more. So, but
yeah.
I think that's where people just figure, hey, if I have my financial house in order, the rest is endless weekends, travel, leisure. What can be so tough about it? And when you ask people how's retirement, they're always going to say it's going great.
Yes,
Um, but yet 1 in 3 struggle. But who's
yes,
going to raise their hand and say it's so hard because you
yeah.
go crazy? You're not having to work anymore. You could
Yeah,
do whatever you want.
exactly. You don't have the pressure of a sales director coming at you every single moment or every single day and say, "Where's your forecast? Where's your number?"
Right.
You really
But
got
we
to pick
bring
that
our
up.
own internal pressure. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, yeah.
We bring our own, because we are people that are productive, that want to feel like we matter, that we
Mm.
have a reason to get up, that we're meaningful in the world.
Yeah. So let's talk then about because you mentioned before that the specialty in your area is the non-financial side, and obviously people when they think of retirement, it's probably one of the first things they think about is how much do I have in my 401k as the in the States and in Australia it's called superannuation. And that's where they tend to focus. So they go and sit down with a financial plan and make sure they've got the right level of finance behind them. They've got enough in their 401k to draw down, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes.
But is it fair to say that they don't necessarily look at other aspects, such as what's my mental health going to be look like, my physical health, the hobbies, and so forth? Because if I look at people that in my career who have gone from one day running, for example, a sales team, always being, all intents and purposes, the font of all knowledge or the oracle or the center of attention, the go-to person, and then they retire, and then the phone stops ringing. But people are not as open to want to go and talk to them because they find out very quickly that it was the role they were playing, not necessarily who they were, that meant the people were calling them. So let's talk about like transitions. And I know
Yes.
that a lot of people go through transition in their career, and you and I have gone through a number of transitions, whether it's a new role or a new company and so forth. When you're working with people in a retirement coaching sort of scenario, how much time do you have to work on this understanding, first of all, of transition, but then managing, I guess, expectations or setting goals, what do you kind of talk about, and what are some of the key things around this transition piece? Because when people are listening to this right now, they might be still 5, 10, 15, 20 years away from retirement. And
Yeah.
just like putting money away for your retirement, you've got to start thinking about what are the transitions that I'm going to have to go through so that I am prepared. So what are some
Yes.
things that you think about, you focus on, but also some of the, I guess, the triggers that people need to be conscious of?
Yeah, well, there's a lot there to discuss, and I really appreciate it. And keep me honest if I don't touch upon everything. You did speak to this concept of roles, so I want to bring that up right away. That there's a vast difference between our roles and our identity, and yet they become intertwined oftentimes. And when we're high-powered sales leaders, especially, we basically kind of feel it's all one and the same. And
Yeah.
so there is a saying that if you are what you do, who are you when you don't? And
Yes.
so, this idea that when we step away from career, then we can leave pieces of ourselves behind.
Yeah.
And yet, so that's a piece that I really focus on with my clients is really digging deep and saying, but at the essence, who are you? What's important to you? What
Yeah.
resonates with you? And we go through exercises even of thinking back when you were younger, and what really sparked you, and where did your dreams carry you, or what was kind of fun for you. We talk about like if nobody was watching, what would it be that you would do? All kinds of questions to just sort of excavate a little bit of that. That's probably gotten very buried as we become these
Mm.
responsible adults and we're moving and shaking things. And so that's one area. Another area, and so to share them with your listeners as you look at this runway to retirement, I think the sooner that you can start, and I think younger generations have this more embedded in them than those that are of the retirement age, the baby boomers, because baby boomers and Generation X were not really raised with positive psychology. That came on the scene 30 years ago. And I
Mm.
know I'm digressing, but I think it's important because we were raised, because I'm part of that generation, we were raised to be productive and efficient and get things done and no pain, no gain and power through. And if something emotional came up, then we pushed it aside or we suppressed it.
Yeah.
And I do think that some of those attributes do match with a sales leader because
Mm.
we want to get things done. We're productive. We drive after the numbers. We want to meet and exceed those expectations and
Yeah.
things. And so by recognizing then that if this is in our makeup as we're moving toward retirement, whether it's a year out, 5 years out, 10 years out, or if you're much younger than that as well, just really allowing for those emotions to be signals to you that, oh, is something amiss? Like you
Mm.
noticed in your corporate job that something's amiss, as did
Yeah.
I. So
Yeah.
along the way, just really bringing our consciousness, our awareness to that. So that's one area. Shall I pause or keep going?
No, it's just on on the identity part. It's a really fascinating thing because when you and I experienced this myself. So I left corporate in 2015, and I experienced the fact that the phone stopped ringing literally one day after I left corporate, right?
Yeah.
And y- I had to do a lot of work in terms of who am I and who was I at my core. And sometimes people can get I get really caught up in who they are in terms of their role. So you ask them, what do you do? Well, I'm the senior vice president of sales at XYZ organization, right? And you think,
Yeah.
well, that's fantastic. That's your title. That's what you do on a daily basis. But who are you? And so
Yes.
I think that's where a lot of the deep work needs to be, and this power of identity and the value set that you have. And I'll be curious to know, as part of your work, how much work do you do on the underlying values that the person has that can
Mhm.
help them get really dialed in on who they are at their core, not just what they do, because
Yes.
you can get lost if and sometimes this transition stuff, it happens to you, and some would say, well, it happens for you, but often it's beyond your control. And if
Yes.
you don't have a really dialed in view of who you are, it can actually be very detrimental, not just for your mental health, but also to your physical health, because you say, well, hang on, my entire identity was linked to that role, that organization. Now
Yes.
I don't have that. Therefore, who am I? I don't know. What do I do now?
Right. Yeah. So we do I mean, we delve into the positive psychology piece of it. We delve into Martin Seligman's work around PERMA, which is this idea of needing, are you acquainted with, positive emotion and engagement and relationships and meaning and
Mm.
achievement, and that these are all um, essentials for well-being. And so I have clients go through, okay, in work, what enabled PERMA? And so we really looked at those aspects. And what can you move into retirement?
Mm.
What are some of those passions, skills, capabilities, interests that you fostered in your career that you could move in? And just as importantly, what do you want to let go of?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's really pivotal when we're transitioning, whether we're going from a career position to another or career into retirement, because if we don't really give it that space and grace to look at what's happening internally, and we only look at the external, then we're not truly transitioning. William Bridges is prolific in his work around transitions, and he speaks, you're smiling, so you're acquainted. He speaks to that concept, that we need to start looking at the difference between change, which is external, we're changing roles,
Yeah.
and internal, which is when we're moving into a new era in our lives, a new phase. And hand in hand with that, what Bridges speaks about starting with the ending.
Mm.
And so, like, you faced it right away that, wow, the phone stopped. And so then really recognizing, okay, what else do I have to put closure to, whether it's
Yeah.
forced on me or I welcome it, but put a period or an exclamation mark, and begin with that ending. So
Mm.
often, and I know for myself, when I changed from career to career,
Yeah.
I would jump right into the new beginning, because I'd be charged up and ready to go, and make all kinds of changes in my 30-day, 60-day, 90-day plan, etc. And so I didn't really think about, what do I need to leave behind? So I carried a lot of patterns and habits and limiting beliefs with me then into that new position. I don't want that for anyone. And I
Yeah.
really focus on that with my clients, is what do we need to have an ending to? And then Bridges speaks about this neutral zone.
Mm.
That's the second step. And that's where a lot of the reflective work goes with my clients, is doing that digging deep. Like you
Yeah.
said, what's important to me? What do I want for this next period in my life before we embark then on that new beginning?
It's I've used the Bridges transition curve in many workshops over the last, say, 5 or 6 years, and
Yeah.
it never ceases to amaze me that every time I teach it, I learn something new from it and about it. And one of the things that it wasn't taught to me, but it just came to me because I'm a very big fan of Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey, and
Yes.
it works very well into the Bridges transition curve, where essentially you've got the old world, I guess the threshold that people have to cross over, but they refuse the call, and then you've got your new world. So starting
Yeah.
with the ending
Love
in
that.
mind in terms of what is the new world looking like, which for many people it's completely unknown. And the unknown element of the new world can be very daunting and scary for some because they're used to being in a certain role, doing a certain thing, being reflected on, looked at as a certain type of role. It's the transition or the neutral zone that is the really important part, because you have to grapple with, okay, this part of my life or this part of my career is potentially ending. I now have to have a level of courage to take a step into the new world, which for
Yeah.
many of us will be unknown, but have the faith. This is where your positive psychology and your confidence comes into it, to take that leap of faith, because it's actually it's actually better than perhaps you think it is. But unless you take that step, you're
Yes.
not going to actually know, and you don't want to be living in regret.
Right, right. Because we know that the most growth comes out of that discomfort when we're kind of pushing ourselves a little beyond our comfort. And when
Yeah,
we stay in a place of comfort, we're oftentimes stagnating. We're
yeah.
oftentimes really not challenging ourselves in a healthy way, not in
Mm.
a way so that's where I think working with someone like you or myself to be that thought partner and be that sounding board and walk shoulder to shoulder down that path. And it happens very quickly. It's not like
Mm.
we're not going to move in with people or anything, but just opening that awareness. I think that's the key. Is I speak to having that awareness, heightening your awareness, setting your intentions, and then getting into action. I call
Yeah,
it AIM.
yeah.
Awareness, intention, movement.
Love it, love it.
Taking aim on it. So,
Now, it would be remiss of me to not ask you this question, Wendy, and that is, just the question around retirement as well, in terms of when you're working with clients, and to full disclosure, my belief around retirement is that you retire, right? You literally stop and you put out for better term, you put out to pasture, right? So in the work that you do in the retirement coaching space, how much of it is to get really clear on defining retirement so that it's not, hey, I'm really active and a meaningful contributor to a business, to now I'm actually just living off my savings, going to the country club every day, going to lunch, sitting on my couch watching Netflix. How much of the work that you do is, and maybe it's customized for each person, but defining what actual retirement is and what it means.
Yeah. I mean, that's my starting point with people is I really do say, when they come to me, it's like, okay, what is it that you're looking to retire to? And what are you retiring with? Because I've had some clients who have come to me for retirement planning, and it's become very obvious that they don't want to retire.
Yeah,
And they're not ready to retire. They're just being pushed to retire. Their family or friends, or they're seeing out, I'm of a certain age. And so I should, and we know that's an external pressure, should retire. And so I don't advocate for retiring. I just, as I shared with you earlier, I advocate for, if you're choosing to retire, that you retire well, that
yeah,
you're planful about it and you know what you're stepping into. And I call it realistic optimism. So instead of having that idealistic view on one end of the spectrum where it's leisure, travel, endless weekends, sitting on the couch watching Netflix, to then this pessimistic view where it's loss and your world is narrowing and you don't get any phone calls any longer and one foot in the grave. I like to see it, it's not black or white. I like to see it in that happy sweet spot in the middle,
yeah,
that realistic optimism. So it does, that's where I speak to this piece about awareness, but it does start with defining what does retirement look like to you. And I
right.
have people start with an exercise called No Regrets Retirement, and
Okay,
I'll offer that in a little workbook if any of your listeners would like to listen,
sure.
have that. But it is the idea of envisioning what's that first day in retirement and breaking it down like kind of hour by hour and then through the week so that you really get this really granular view of what's this going to look like. And then you've got that. And now, of course, we've got this time abundance and we feel like, okay, I've got plenty of time to do these things. But then the next page is if you only had 5 years, if that time horizon was brought closer to you, and then we see what priorities bubble up and
Right.
what you'd want to make sure that got done and what's the vital few for you. And then
Yeah.
the last page is if your time is now ended and you only have 48 hours, would you have regrets? What would that be? What would that look like for you? Because now we can reverse engineer. We've got that time now. We've got that runway to retirement. So all of your listeners have that. So start to be more intentional and more mindful about the stepping stones that we're laying out as we move into retirement.
Yeah.
So when you mention, of course, everyone's going to retire. Yes, the great preponderance of people believe that they're going to retire and plan on it. However, I think the tide is changing. I think that we're starting to see it's not really about an age or a life stage. I mean, unless someone's not at choice. But if they are, then it's really, well, again, what are you retiring to? What does
Mm,
that mean for you?
mm,
There's that move afoot, you've probably heard of it, FIRE, where financially independent, retire early. And it's kind of like, okay, what are you retiring to? Like, how do you even define it? Is it truly just another career, or are you really, what is it? So the word retire needs to be retired. It doesn't fit in our vocabulary any longer, but it's a shared one. So for now, we're kind of stuck with it. But I do think that over time, we'll see that it will be retired because, it came up in the 30s when people were in the factories and the fields and they were working so hard and they were tired. And
yes.
so they had to stop working, and Social Security was there to help them for the couple years that they lived
Yeah.
before they expired. But we know now that people on average will live, we hope 20 to 30 more years after the traditional 65 retirement age, which again, I don't advocate for. I just am there if that's what people are choosing. So,
That's it's fascinating because it's interesting when you talk about that actual word retire. And I mean, he's passed on now, but I've been a big follower of Bob Proctor for many years, and Bob Proctor was always talking about, I'm never going to retire because I'm loving what I'm doing, and what am I going to do if I retire? I'm just going to sit around and do absolutely nothing. So I'm going to continue to be active,
Yes.
and I guess this points to the fact that if you're working in something and doing something that is meaningful, that you're delivering value that lights you up every single day, that excites you and keeps your energy flowing, you shouldn't need to necessarily retire. There might be some slowing down, there might be some delegation that increases and so forth, but you shouldn't necessarily have to retire to go from adding value to now being in the pasture, enjoying doing nothing.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I think that is, as coaches, we know that concept of it's not either or, it can be yet both and. And so it doesn't have to be that you're one day you're in career and the next day you're retired and on the couch. You can look at all kinds of different options. So, like you said, delegating things, or maybe having a cut back on your hours, or even making a commitment to yourself. Okay, I'm going to just relook at how I time block, and I'm going to start to commit to a little exercise each day, or I'm going to commit to bringing in a new activity into my life so that we're using this time. That's what I really impress upon my clients if they come to me before they actually retire, is this runway. Because we
Yeah.
hear so often people say, oh, when I retire, I'll get healthy, I'll go to the gym. And it's like, if we don't have those habits and patterns, we don't have that thought process, why all of a sudden are we going to now do that? And I do want to mention, because you mentioned the couch several times, so I have to put a spotlight on it, that statistics tell us that on average, a retiree watches 47 hours of TV a week.
47 hours.
Yeah. So, if somebody has a 50-hour week job, they basically are replacing it with television. And we know how unhealthy, for so many reasons, from a cognitive standpoint, a physical standpoint, a socially connected standpoint. And so, I have a lot of statistics, but that one I think is very, very sobering. And so, the my husband and I have been like on a TV diet, because and I don't plan to retire anytime, but it's like after reading that, it's like, oh my goodness, I have to make sure that I never go on that path. That's just like not, and no judgment if anybody's listening, and
No.
that's what makes them, but I just like to put a spotlight on it. So
What if it was 47 hours of TV which was feeding the mind with super positivity? Is that okay? Or
I don't, I would rather they take a really quick course in positivity. I've got a great one to offer. Yeah. No, yeah. Cause no, that's, yeah. So unhealthy. And I think too, it's important to know that, I think that people do look at retirement as that trophy that they want to achieve.
yeah,
But yet the research shows us that 1 in 3 struggle in
yeah,
retirement.
yeah,
And I think this is really attributed to not going in with eyes wide open. The statistics tell us that 50%, about 1 in 2 pre-retirees, don't feel mentally or socially prepared.
yeah.
And so it's important that we do start to have this level of awareness and intentionality so that we don't fall into that, because time is precious,
Yeah.
and to be floundering around, and hopefully find your place. But I've done presentations where people have been retired for years and they say, "God, I wish I'd known you when." And it's like, but they just suffered with that, or they just didn't get to make the most of it, or they put into patterns, these things that don't serve them, and we don't want that for anyone.
No, absolutely.
Yeah,
And as you were talking, I'm just thinking back to when I was just entering the workforce, and my dad introduced me to the Australian equivalent of 401k. So putting money away for your superannuation. I'm thinking, I'm 22, Dad. What's going on? It's so long until I retire.
yeah,
Well, you know what? Fast forward, I'm closer to retirement than I am. Well, closer to when I should be retiring than when I started working. But I've got no intention of retiring at all. So it's just fascinating how quickly time just flies, right? Absolutely flies. So we've got to be really intentional with what what we stand for, what's important to us, what we have something to look forward to. So I wanted to ask you, in terms of the work that you do, um, the question that comes to mind is, when is the best time, or when is the ideal time to start thinking about this transition? Because I'm sure there are people that get to a certain age where the expectation is from either their company or their family or their wife or husband is, hey, you've been literally burning the candle at both ends for the last 25 years, 30 years. It's time that you
Yeah.
retire. And they had no intention of that. They wake up one day and they think, oh my God, I'm 65, I'm 66. What's going on? I'm not ready. I don't feel ready. At what age should we, and it might be how long's a piece of string type of a question. At what age should we start to at least consider what the future looks like in terms of whatever retirement means for us? Is there an ideal age?
Yeah. I don't know that I believe, based on all my experience and everything that I've read, that there's an ideal age. I think
Mhm.
it is very individual. But what I would say is that by each person, again, being aware of their mental, emotional, physical, spiritual, social, where they stand on things, if they are feeling like there are areas that are really starting to um, not serve them as well, like physically the work is just too demanding and they're seeing that, gosh, I just can't continue, like you said, burning the candle at both ends, then that's a really important signal, and hopefully people are able to be aware of it and able to act upon it. And so then, generally speaking, 1 to 3 years before you retire is a really great time. That's kind of the sweet spot to start this, what I call runway to retirement, because you can then take a step in instead of a leap, and you can experiment and you can try things out and you can start to shift your mindset a little bit away from career into a little bit more of post career,
Mm.
and explore things and just be open to things, because now your spidey senses are more acute in things. So I think that that's what I would share. But I remember doing a presentation. A gentleman at the end came up and he said, I really look forward to working with you. It'll probably be in a couple of years or so, because I'm 91 right now and I'm not planning to retire for a couple more.
91.
So
It's
good on
still
him.
working.
So yeah. So, for me to say that it would be a specific age for anyone, and I think too that, yes, historically it's been in that 62 to 66 kind of range, but we know that that's no longer like if you think about your parents, I'll speak to mine, although
Mm.
mine were always very active and in great health and still are. But the 65 now isn't what the 65 was a generation ago, nor
No.
is it as we go down the path. So,
Yeah.
so the number is really dictated more by Social Security,
Yeah.
in the States, and
Yeah.
probably you have something similar. And
Yeah.
so, no, but if it gives people that opportunity to move on to the next phase of their life and turn the chapter in the book, not write a whole new book, but turn the chapter, then I think that that's fantastic at whatever age, whether it's somebody who's financially independent, retire early at 25, or if it's somebody that waits until they're 95, and anything in between.
Man, retiring at 25, you'd think to yourself, what would you do? What would you do?
Well,
You'd,
again, I mean, so is it the word,
yeah.
because that sounds pretty cool to retire, when you're 25, but are they really, like, what does that, how do they define it? Are they
That's it.
then, investing in things? Are they then traveling? Are they then mentoring? So is that retiring? Yeah, maybe it is. I
Yeah.
mean, it's just how we define it.
And
So,
that, I think that's the key thing, that retirement, when you think about it, has to be really clear for you in terms of what that means. So for some, retirement might be, you know what, I am going to spend 47 hours a week watching TV. And for others is, you know what, retirement means for me that I no longer have, I guess, the implied responsibility to be at an office in certain hours, to do certain meetings and so forth. I can now go and be, I guess, the owner of my own time, and I can choose my own activities, but I'm going to make sure that I continue to be active. I'm going to do some charity work. I'm going to go and mentor a group of people. I'm going to become a coach, right? I'm going to become a mentor. I'm going to
yeah,
pour into the next generation, that I'm going to keep myself active and busy, because what we also know from statistics is if you do not keep your brain active, it will start to entropy. Entropy. Start
atrophy.
Atrophy. There you go.
No,
Whatever the
no.
word is going to start to
One of those B
plateau
words.
and go backwards, right? So,
Yeah.
because I remember one of my earliest coaches talking about the fact that we're either ripe and we're growing, or sorry, no, we're green and we're growing. What was it? We're green and we're growing, or we're ripe and we're rotting.
Mhm.
So if you continue to have the mindset that I can always improve, there's always something to look forward to, there's always a contribution I can make, even though the transition may be, for many people's definition, going from full-time sales leadership, for example, to now not having full-time sales leadership, but it's being replaced with things that add meaning and enable me to make contribution, then in other people's eyes, that might be retirement. But for me, that's a transition into simply another phase of life.
Another phase of life. Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. I think labels so often just box us into things and
Yeah.
then limit our thinking. And I'm really big on all the possibilities. And so I think the more planful that people are, not to make things so so rigid or that they're like having to map everything out so perfectly. It's not that. I think when we have structure, then we have a lot of flexibility. When we have structure, we have a lot of stability. We have something we can fall back on, and that allows us to look at the possibilities and it allows us to pivot. And so I think too that sales leaders, especially because of that drive and especially because of, I don't want to call it instant gratification, but we're always having to meet the numbers.
Mm.
That it is difficult to sort of let go and look at a longer view and kind of give ourselves that space and grace. But what comes with that is such a calm as well as a focus and a clarity about what is meaningful. And
Mm.
we've had that meaning baked into the work that we've done. And now it's on us to really determine, okay, what does that look like for us? Because we're the leaders of ourselves now. I shared that before, the CEO of you,
Yeah.
where you get to decide. But if you don't step into it, then I call it a retirement that I'd like for people to design rather than default, a retirement by design, not
Yeah.
default. So
Yeah.
very important.
It's a really good point you make because the CEO view is an interesting thing because it does point to identity and thinking about what is important to you, what do you stand for, what are your key values, what are your beliefs, and are you in the right environment? Is this the right environment for you? And what does the next, 5, 10, 15, 20 years, whatever age you are right now, look
Yeah.
like for you? I talk to leaders all the time about the power of reflection because so many leaders are so caught up in the day-to-day busyness of doing things. And as you said, they're there to get the number, they're there to make sure that their team are inspired and they're getting the number, et cetera, et cetera. But very often leaders don't sit down and actually do some reflection time to think about what's working for them and what's not, so they can start to not so much just plan forward, but look at what's working so that they can make some tweaks and do some small pivots and maybe start I guess, the mental framework of the transition that will eventually take place. I asked before in terms of what's the best age you work with, and you said, "Oh, normally a runway of 1 to 3 years from retirement age." The other question I've got for you in terms of, because there'll be people listening to this that are probably in their early 30s, maybe early 40s, and that they think that they're, oh, another 20, 30, 40 years away from retirement. And hopefully they're still listening. But if they are, awesome. As it relates to sales leaders and people today, because we've talked a little bit about identity, what's important for us to be thinking about, taking retirement to the side, but more about the CEO of you component? Because I believe, based on our conversation and based on what you do, that if you can get really dialed in on what's important for you and to you, and you understand who you are, then the transitions that you go through in your future, some of which may be self-done, others might be placed in your path, you're going to be in a much better position to more effectively handle those transitions. So for sales leaders that they're thinking, well, I'm so far away from retirement, it's not even something worth thinking about, but I haven't necessarily started to think about my identity and stuff like that. What are some things that they can consider to think about that you might take your clients through as part of their transition into retirement that can help these people become the better CEO of themselves?
Yeah, I mean, it is that idea of being at choice and being accountable. I think so often people do abdicate choice because of circumstances, because of, they're not maybe paying attention. They're just seeing that next next goal or that next achievement that they're going after. And so I think really being very mindful about that, I think is really, really important, first of all. I think too that if we don't really allow for the idea that if we don't make choices, they're going to be made for us. I mean, there is no such thing as not a choice, right? When we don't make a choice, then that's a choice. And so I'm kind of repeating myself, but I feel very, very strongly about that. And that might just seem really basic, but I think so often people just don't really step into taking charge of their decisions. And when we're working for other people, oftentimes we don't have that opportunity, but then we can get into that pattern. So I think that's something that I would definitely want to raise up. I think this idea of values is critically important, and it's foundational at any age. And I step my clients through that, where we really look at, at the core, what are your non-negotiables? What are the things that really, really matter to you? And really defining those, because those become our guardrails. So when decisions come up, like I shared, in my past career, where it was just, it was not in alignment with my values, I was overlooking that for a bit, and then finally just had to have that realization. So I would share that with any any of your listeners, is that if things start to feel like they're out of alignment, then really do give yourself that time to think about, why is this not feeling good to me? Where's the disconnect for me? What's in my sphere of control or influence?
Yeah.
What looks to me like it would be then the next best step for me, as opposed to just pushing it down or pushing it away. I think too that with identity, oftentimes we can kind of follow a path that wasn't our own to begin with. So I know for myself that when I went into fashion, I love that. I worked for Nordstrom for several years. And I mean, my gosh, what a fantastic foundation around service and sales. But then I decided, well, I needed to be in outside sales. And I had a friend that was in outside sales, and that just seemed like so glamorous to me. And so then I made that change, but it didn't really connect with me. And then I just went on that path, and then just kept getting promoted and just kept pushing ahead, and not listening to that little voice. So I guess I would say, let's make sure that we're listening to that voice and not quieting that voice if we start to feel like, this just isn't representing my best self. I'm not saying that we still have to be realistic. We still have the finances that we need to be looking after. I understand that, but I just think there needs to be that balance, and at least that checking on ourselves. So those are some of the things I mentioned.
And it's a really good point, because we do so much work on others. We do so much work on maybe team strategy or business strategy or sales strategy, but we don't spend near enough time on our own strategy, on understanding who we are at our core, what are our values, what is our identity, what are the decisions that I'm making, what is my vision. And a lot of the time, I think it's based on ignorance, because we don't know where to start. Or, as you rightly said, it's other people in our environment who have influenced us to go down on a certain path, and we haven't necessarily questioned that. We've just followed that because I've seen my father do this, or my mother do that, or an uncle do this, or somebody who is influential in our life. They've done a certain thing, so that looks good. I'll go and do that, without really considering or understanding, well, is this really what I want to do? But more importantly, is this who I really am, so that I can do what it is that I'm doing?
Yeah, what comes to my mind too is that as sales leaders, as salespeople, we're competitive by nature.
Yeah.
We want to hit that goal and things. And so sometimes we can become very narrowly focused on that goal. And we're
Mm.
pushing aside, again, those signals that tell us that maybe something is amiss or out of alignment. So,
Yeah.
and at some point it comes back to us. So I'd rather that people along the way nurture that inner voice, and really be able to at least recognize it, be aware, and then make some conscious decisions, make those choices.
Yeah, and it's okay. And another part of this is you've got to be really clear on who you choose to have around you as your support mechanism, your inner circle.
Yes.
Sometimes family are well-intentioned, but they're not necessarily aligned with you because they're coming from their own frame of reference and what's been good for them or what they've seen work. But you've got to really choose carefully in terms of who you have around you. But have the courage to really look inside and say, well, who am I? Who am I at my core? Because I'm forever talking to people who they're very, and Simon Sinek talks about this all the time, that you're very good at talking about what you do, and to some degree you can talk about how you do it. But when you ask the question as to why you do what you do, what gets you up in the
Yes.
morning, what motivates you, there's a lot of people that really struggle because they come diverting back to, well, this is what I do. Oh, that's not what I asked. Why do you do what you do?
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
whether you're 5 years, 10 years, 15 or 30 years away from retirement, really sit down and start to do that internal work and internal analysis and really figure out, who am I, right? Because
Yeah.
once you've done that, any transition that is placed upon in your path, it now becomes more of an opportunity because you know who you are versus, oh my God, this is an obstacle, right? So it's something to
Yes.
look forward to rather than something to push away.
Yeah, yeah, and that you're responding to the opportunity rather than reacting to it, and
Yeah.
being motivated because you're moving towards something, not that you're trying to avoid something. I want to underscore Simon Sinek's work in case any of your listeners want to look it up, because you're speaking to that golden circle that he speaks
Yeah.
about, and that in the middle of that, the core of it is your why. And
Mm.
so often in retirement, and then for your listeners, wherever they are in their age and life stage, we do look at that what. And so a lot of people go into retirement and they have their to-do list and their bucket list and all the plans that they're going to do, but that's really about the doing, not the being.
Yeah.
And the why gets at that being. And I like that saying by Eckhart Tolle that we're human beings, not human doings.
That's
So I
right.
think that that's an important one. So I want to circle back to, because you mentioned about connection,
Yes.
and and I think that that's inherent in a sales leader or salesperson. We are interactive and we are engaging, and we do love that. I mean, I'm thinking that for the majority, and maybe that's not the case because we're all effective in our different ways. But to your point, then when we move into retirement, we lose those connections.
Mm.
We assume that, a lot of the people that we've worked with, that they'll carry over because they're friends, or our clients will carry over, but then we don't have that common bond any longer, that goal that we're working toward. And so research tells us that at least 50% of those connections on a daily basis are going to drop. You
Yep.
shared it 100% in that moment of time had. But the point being is that that's again something in this runway, to just be mindful when we're so focused on career, those friends that we had in elementary school or high school or college or other jobs, that can fall by the wayside. And then we start to look at, gosh, our circle has really narrowed. And
Mm.
then as we get older, it can get even smaller. And we know there's this epidemic of loneliness, and it really hits hard with everyone, including those that are in the retirement age. So we want to think about fostering those friendships and knowing that to have good friends, we need to be a good friend and reach out to people and keep those conversations and relationships going. And then also make fresh friends,
Mm.
and reach out to others and start to build, like you said, that tribe that will be supportive of you, that will help mentor you or walk down that path with you, etc.
Absolutely. It's such a good point. And it's a great way to wrap this up because it's the power of connection. So Wendy, this has been a very, very enlightening conversation. I've taken a lot away from this for myself, and I'll be able to pour this into some of my clients that I'm talking with as well from a sales leadership perspective. For people who are listening to this, they want to connect with you and learn a little bit more about what you do. You mentioned before you've got a downloadable thing, a checklist or something that they can do some work on themselves around. Where's
Yes.
the best place for, first of all, for them to connect with you and also to get access to something like that?
Yeah, I think the easiest way is to go to my website, which is
Mhm.
confluxretirementcoaching.com, and that's spelled Conflux. So
Okay.
confluxretirementcoaching.com.
Yeah.
And there's an opportunity for you to click on a link to fill out a little form. And
Yeah.
so that you can just request the retirement readiness workbook if you'd like it. There's also a link that if you'd like to set up a discovery call with me, I do offer a complimentary 1 hour session where we can go over the work that you've done in that workbook, or we can talk about the obstacles or opportunities you're seeing, or anything else that might start you in this path to this retirement by design, not default.
Nice. Awesome. And we've connected on LinkedIn, so I'll also put your LinkedIn profile in the show notes so we
Love
can
that.
continue to
Yeah.
build the connection and widen the network.
Yeah. Very good.
Awesome. So, Wendy, thanks so much for being a guest on the Exceptional Sales Leader podcast. And may you continue to add lots and lots of value in the work that you're doing with in your retirement coaching business.
Oh, I so appreciate it. It was really just a very energizing conversation. We didn't know where it was going to go, but we came pretty full circle, and here we are. And I do appreciate the opportunity.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. Thank you for listening to the Exceptional Sales Leader podcast. I trust the information in this episode has been helpful in your journey towards becoming exceptional. And remember, please take the time to rate the show, subscribe to the show so other people can find it. But also, if I can help you, jump on my calendar, go to leadwithdarren.com and let's have a conversation about how I can help you along your journey to being exceptional.